Welcome back to another episode of Consciously Clueless. I'm your host, Carly, and here we break down complex issues around health, the climate crisis, and social justice through a vegan lens. We'll talk about the magic link between your well-being and the planet's health, because luckily, choosing a healthier, mindful lifestyle for yourself often creates healthier vibes for our planet too. Staying consciously clueless means getting to show up knowing nothing, but staying open to all that you can learn. From feasting on plant-based meals and reducing waste to learning to meditate, every step you take contributes to your wellness and makes systematic change for the world. You can make a difference. This podcast will show you how. Hello, I am back for a solo episode this month. I took a break last month, if you remember, and really just because I needed to rest, and I'm getting better at recognizing that. But no fear, I'm back to dive into something for a short episode, just you and I here today, and I'm really excited about it because apparently I've learned that I make big decisions or try new things in the summer months very often because I have some anniversaries that I'd like to discuss with you. But before getting into all of that, I want to remind you that not only can you be listening to this episode like you are right now, but you could be watching it and watching the video on Patreon. Patreon is a really cool platform that I use to share bonus content. There is bonus Consciously Cannabis content. There is weekly tarot card pulls for mindfulness. There is early release of some episodes. There's just a lot of cool stuff going on over there. It's a way to get more content like bonus smoke sessions for Consciously Cannabis. I might do one at the end of this episode, spoiler alert, and just other ways to support creators that you love the work they're doing. So just an invitation to check that out, patreon.com/consciouslycarly, and let me know what you think. So let's get into it. This summer, I am recording this in 2024, will be this week actually that I'm recording this in the beginning of August, is 6 years being vegan for me. And later this month is 5 years of being alcohol free. And not only that, but I started teaching, yoga 6 years ago this summer. It's been 4 years ago in June that I started my podcast. So there's something about the summer months that must just really get me energized because I started listing out these things and where they fall in the calendar. I was like, wow, that's a short time period that all of these decisions have been made. But specifically, I wanted to dive into a couple of those maybe a bit more deep. And the first one is being 5 years alcohol free in a couple of weeks. And I've shared about some of that journey on Consciously Cannabis episodes, on episodes just in general, talking about my own habits and my own wellness. But if you haven't heard that, I wanted to dive into that a little bit because it's an important part of my life. And not only that, but adding cannabis back into my life was important. And of course, led us to Consciously Cannabis and all of those things and all of the cool people I've already gotten to talk to with those interviews. So I wanted to share a bit about that journey. It's not something I talk about as much. That's not for any particular reason, so much as I just feel like I should talk about it more. It is something that felt like a big decision at the time and still does, and my thinking around it has evolved like these other things on the list. So let's get into it. About 5 years ago, the last time I drank alcohol was at a wedding, which feels pretty classic. And when people hear that you don't drink alcohol, a lot of questions about addiction often come up. And for any of these stories, I just want to make sure it's clear that I am just speaking from my own experience. That is what I'm here to do today and to share what it was like for me. I did not deal with issues of addiction. These were choices for other reasons, and I don't want to undervalue or underplay how these decisions can look or feel very different if that is something you're dealing with. And if you need help with that, please reach out and find resources. But I just want to make sure that that's clear, that that is not necessarily my experience. So I had a pretty standard relationship with alcohol, I would say, in terms of drank more of it growing up in college, and it was something that I never was like super good at. I'm a bit of a lightweight, which was great for my wallet, but just didn't take much to not only be intoxicated from alcohol, but to be sick. And that was an experience that I was having more and more. And not only that, but when I was getting sick, it was like, man, it was hard to recover. It was not being 20 in college anymore. And as years went on, I was dealing with different mental health issues and depression and anxiety specifically. And both were getting worse. Both were getting worse for multiple reasons in my personal life. And I noticed that every time I drank alcohol, sometimes that alcohol was a response to said anxiety. And when I would do that, I started to realize that every time I was drinking, my anxiety was getting worse. I was even waking up in the middle of the night a few hours from going to bed from, let's say, drinking some wine or something, and my anxiety was out of this world. It was just another level. And it just didn't feel like it was helping. It just felt very clear that my anxiety on a good day was present, but with alcohol was like, hello, what if we scream at you about all of the things you should be worried about in this life? So in that vein, I was like, I think I just need a break. I think I should just take a couple weeks off and see what happens. And again, I wasn't someone who had a habit of drinking every day. It was definitely more of a social thing for me. But I also wasn't probably someone casually drinking so much as either not drinking or getting drunk and feeling sick. There wasn't often too much in between those two poles for me. And so I started to back off from alcohol. And I went a month and realized that that felt really nice. So I kept going. I was like, oh, I'll go 2 months. Oh, I'll go 3 months. Oh, I'll go 4 months. Wow, I wonder if I could hit 6 months. And then I was like, well, I bet I could hit a year. And as I kept doing that, kind of moving through that, I just felt better. And not instantly and not universally, but overall, I could tell that I physically and mentally were feeling better. One, not getting sick because you drank too much wine, and by sick I mean like throwing up, is great, turns out. And also not adding and piling on to the anxiety that I had made a huge difference. And I look back, and not in any way with regret, because that's a waste of my time, but just in the sense of realizing, like, not only was I realized I was dealing with anxiety and depression for longer than certainly than I had a diagnosis or was using that language or finding tools in an intentional way, but alcohol definitely sometimes exacerbated my anxiety before this as well. And I can kind of see that now, which is one of the reasons I like to share about this, right? Is that you don't necessarily have to have a quote unquote problem. Obviously it was a problem, but how we see it in society, right? To examine your relationship with substances. And so I felt good and I just kept going. And I want to insert something here because at the time that I stopped drinking, I was not smoking cannabis at the time for other reasons in my life that I will not do again. I was not smoking cannabis at the time. And although I have no issue and sometimes wish I wouldn't have stopped because it definitely helps with my anxiety, I'm actually in some ways glad that when I quit drinking alcohol, I was all the way sober. I was not using any substances, so that really forced me to reorientate my self to the world, and specifically to social settings where alcohol is often present or used as a like, I just need a glass of wine and I'll be fine, or like, let's do a shot and then we'll dance, like those types of things. I had to do all of that with no substances. And so I was kind of learning and relearning to go to the bar, to go to maybe like a work function, to do XYZ without needing to pregame or have a substance. And I think it was really good for me to feel what that was like and to get really comfortable with myself. Because I think oftentimes, again, speaking from my experience, we're using alcohol to loosen up or to get through some social anxiety. And I think sometimes that alcohol was almost like helping the social anxiety, because I was like, oh, I'm just gonna be anxious until I get a glass of wine. And really, social anxiety, I have a lot of flavors of anxiety that I deal with. Social anxiety is not often too big of one. And so I think it was making that worse. And now that I don't feel like I'm waiting for something to kick in to be okay in a setting, or that I need something because people are going to be pressuring or I'm going to feel weird without it, now that I had to move through that totally sober, it feels like a good reorientation towards the world. And it feels like I really had to confront some of the like anxious thoughts that come with all of those things. And I'm really glad that I did it. And so I had not been drinking alcohol for a while. And honestly, managing other people's reactions and expectations sometimes becomes a harder thing than your own experience. I also have that with veganism, right? And many other things, that any decisions you make, right, that feel a little counterculture from the narrative oftentimes make other people uncomfortable, and that uncomfortability then gets pushed on you sometimes, and not for any malicious reason. It's oftentimes we're not wanting to examine our own experiences with the things that you're bringing up or that I'm bringing up, and you're like, oh, let me say things or justify things or be like, oh, I'm so sorry, do you not want me to drink? Like, often well-intentioned, but it was more managing other people and being at the bar those first few months and people being like, are you okay? You're not drinking? Are you needing to talk? And very well-intentioned. Other times people would make dumbass comments too, but that's neither here nor there. But it was interesting to see what managing other people's comments are. And so if that is something that you've either experienced or you're considering, I think it is nice to have a friend or a family or just people in your life. Maybe it's your therapist, maybe it's whoever is safe and trusted, to give a heads up. Like if something is changing in your life, if you're setting a goal, if you're trying to go alcohol free, if you're trying to eat more plants, if you are trying to whatever it is, having someone, you hear about this a lot with coaching, right? And like accountability. But it makes sense. If you have someone in your life who you can reach out to and be like, hey, I think I'm going to try and cut back on alcohol for a while. And I'm a little nervous about that, and not everyone's going to be on board. So if that gets hard, would you mind being my person that I kind of reach out to and talk to about that? That can be a really helpful strategy when you are starting to figure out like the social stuff of being alcohol free, whatever culture you're in, if that is a normal thing that people will be like, what are you doing? And that expectation. So let's cut to cannabis. I had not been drinking for a bit, and I maybe had smoked weed like 2 or 3 times in a few years period. I'd smoked for years, a lot, and then did not for years. And of course, we're back. But at that time, I was not smoking. And so I, after not drinking for a while, started smoking again and was pretty quickly reminded that that is what my body really loves and what I prefer, and personally does not make me sick. I know that everyone's experience is different. Again, this is just for me. I am not saying that everyone should be alcohol free and become a stoner, although if you want to, I recommend it. But no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just sharing from my experience because these conversations need to be out there more about our habits and our uses, so we can feel comfortable bringing them up. And once I started smoking again, that was just so clearly what my body preferred. It definitely is a factor in helping with both my anxiety and depression, and not the only thing, but I know that having cannabis in my life again and also not having alcohol is a huge benefit to my mental health. It's it's just very clear. It is just so much clearer now to see that there is a different level of mental stability when I was having alcohol, and having alcohol when I wasn't feeling good with my mental health, and having cannabis, and what those relationships are. And I think that it is something that everyone has to figure out, of course, for themselves. And it's good to, no matter what, if you are a weed smoker, if you drink alcohol, I think pausing in any relationship with those things and asking yourself some questions is just a really healthy habit in general. It is something Jabria Kraft talked about on the last Consciously Cannabis episode. She is that dope coach, and she shares content online and through her website and coaching that really talks about like asking yourself a few questions. She's not saying don't smoke weed, but she's like, okay, are you feeling like you're smoking a lot? Are you feeling weird about your practice? Or did someone confront you and it made you feel guilty? Here are a few questions you could journal or could just consider off the top of your head and check in with your relationship. I think it's a great idea to do with alcohol too, right? We know that so many times alcohol is being used to mask things and to cover up things and to numb things, and we're all looking for ways to do that oftentimes in this world. There is no judgment for that. Hello, 2024, it's rough. But asking a few of those questions can really help just kind of like maybe gauge where you're at, maybe check in with yourself. So I encourage you to do that regardless of what substances you are putting into your body. Maybe it's even food, maybe it is even chocolate. I don't know. If there's something you're kind of questioning and something you're putting into your body, journal about it or ask some questions or talk to a friend, talk to a therapist, a trusted person of like, what's your relationship with alcohol? I would just love to like chat with that. It's been something on my mind, and I think you'll be surprised that more people want to have those conversations than we realize. So that is a little bit of journey with being alcohol free and then introducing cannabis back into my life as well. I love talking about these things, and I think we'll hear about them more and more, but I kind of can't believe it's been 5 years of alcohol free, especially in the sense that I started out with being like, let's see a month, let's see two, let's see three. And honestly, while at first socially people are like, wait, what? What's going on? Or, oh, come on, just a drink, which don't be that person. That's never helpful. Nobody wants that. But now that it's 5 years and I feel like the people in my life all know and nobody is questioning me or pressuring me, it just feels like not a big deal. And genuinely, sometimes I forget about it. Like I had a birthday party and was like planning food and snacks and getting sparkling waters. And somebody was like, "Oh, are you gonna get any alcohol for folks?" And I was like, "That's right. That's a thing." So it is something that doesn't come up for me as much. And if you have good supportive people in your life, which I really hope whoever's listening to this does, you have people that start to not care because that just is what you're doing. Or it sparks conversation for other people. I've had that as well, and definitely had that with cannabis. I love, please, please, if you are someone who has stopped me in my small hometown or reached out to me and replied to a newsletter or whatever it is and been like, that Consciously Cannabis series is fun. I love the people that have unexpectedly been like, I kind of love the cannabis talk. Let's talk about it more. It's legal in Minnesota. It's legal in so many places. And let's talk about not only your habits, but talk about making it a healthy relationship, the power of cannabis, and the power of talking about being alcohol free too, right? Like those are great conversations to have if you are questioning or things come up for you. You can have these conversations in a non-judgmental way. So that's a little bit of my journey. If you have any similarities or questions, I would love to hear from you and love to hear more about your experiences with these things because I think it's really interesting. And I'm not going to get into the science of it all because that's not my total lane, right? There is a lot of interviews on the podcast so far, the Consciously Cannabis series, with people that know way more than me in terms of descheduling, rescheduling, federal regulations, about getting people out of jail that are still sitting there for weed. Like, there's a lot to the conversation around cannabis. This is just my personal experience, but there is more to it than just getting high and helping with my anxiety, although that is a great benefit. And another anniversary that has popped up is being vegan for 6 years. I won't get into this too much. I've talked about it on the podcast before. You are familiar with why I went vegan. It was really motivated by health, and then the other dominoes just like quickly fell in terms of the environment and human rights and animal rights. And really, the biggest thing I've learned in the last 6 years, or continued to learn, or was pushed to learn because of this decision, is the interconnectedness of everything. And now that gets thrown out a lot. I say it probably daily on Instagram, but truly, not only the interconnectedness of our systems of oppression, but the interconnectedness of our everyday experiences. And veganism for me has been a helpful tool to continue to connect to that. And again, this is my experience. It's also been really helpful for my health and for my overall wellness, and to align what I want the world to look like, what I hope the world to look like, my morals, with my actions in a way that feels really concrete. It is not a perfect solution, just like going alcohol free or anything. Any changes are not a perfect solution, but is it the best one that you can make in the moment with the information you're given? And for me, I have the privilege to eat plant-based and lead a vegan life, and it continues to be one of the best decisions I ever made. And I love that every year I keep learning better ways to be a human and better ways to show up in the world. And veganism definitely helps me do that. And of course, there are some like practical, what I wish I would have known things. I've done episodes about that before. But a lot of it is managing how to live a vegan life or do your best in a non-vegan world. It's not that it is hard, again, my experience, hard for me personally, so much that it is figuring out how to exist in this way in a world that wasn't set up for it. So whether that's practical, like going out to eat at a restaurant and being like, what am I going to eat here besides a side salad and french fries? Or maybe even just in bigger ways, learning about the food systems, learning that there is no perfect answer, right? In terms of being like, just because you're plant-based doesn't mean that the avocado industry, the banana industry, or all these other things don't have ways to be improved. So there's so many gifts I've been given because of that decision. And I am so thankful that 6 years ago, I was slowly taking animal products out of my diet, learning more about the environment, not buying leather and wool and things. And then finally I was just like, I got to do this. I need to do this. I have the information. And it felt really right. And I think that there's no coincidence that in a few years' time here, these decisions all felt easier, right? It's no mistake that it was 6 years ago I went vegan and started teaching yoga, and then a year later I went alcohol free. I think all of these things are connected in some way, shape, or form, which is why I bring all of them up, because I think you never know what one decision will lead to. It's so cliche, but it's so true that I'm so happy that 6 years ago, one decision helped lead to so many others. I mean, helped lead to this podcast, right? And going alcohol free and introducing cannabis back into my life somehow led me to that Consciously Cannabis series, and just reminding ourselves that those decisions, even if you're just like, let me see what a month of no alcohol is. Let me see what a month of eating plant-based is. Let me try a week of meditating, right? These things can have big ripple effects. Don't underestimate them. I would love to hear from you if any of these stories resonate, if you are thinking of making any of these decisions in your life. This isn't technically a Consciously Cannabis episode, but I am going to do a little bonus Patreon only smoke session. So if you want to watch that or watch this whole video, head over to Patreon and I will smoke with you, or you can just join. You don't have to smoke either way, as a little bonus, and talk a little bit more about these things for a few minutes. If you are not headed over there, thanks for listening. Thanks for thinking about these things, having these conversations, and let me know if this resonated with you. If you're hearing this message, you've listened to the entire episode of Consciously Clueless. And for that, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, tag me when you share on social media, or share this episode with others who may be interested in the topic. Any sharing truly means the world to me. Join the community at patreon.com/consciouslycarly for bonus podcast content like smoke sessions with Consciously Cannabis guests, video versions of solo episodes, monthly live calls, one-to-one support, more lifestyle content, mindfulness resources, and more. Until next time, stay consciously clueless.